Hey, so I'm changing things up a little bit here. Decided that going live on TikTok was just a distraction. So I'm actually going live on Twitter here and on Instagram here, but I'm using StreamYard. Hey, Nikki. I'm using StreamYard to go on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. So that's a new one for me. I think this might be my first actual YouTube stream. So that's exciting. And if you are watching me on any of those things, I would love it if you would say hello and tell me where you're coming in from. Because I just love having people respond to me because, talking to yourself is kind of boring. Anyway, I should just introduce myself in case people don't know me. My name is Hadass. I am a life coach and a well-being advocate, and I like to talk about things like health, life, and dignity and vigor. In fact, the tagline for my business is vigor and dignity for all because I really feel that those are really important things that everyone deserves to have as their birthright. You do not need to earn dignity, which means being able to support yourself and your family without destroying your soul, and vigor, which means being healthy, having good food, being able to exercise, breathe good air, not be exposed to, gratuitous diseases. And so I think those are really important things that are everyone's birthright on this earth. People do not need to earn them, just like they don't need to earn rest. I'm not really talking tonight about Trisha Hersey, but I love her book. It's called Rest is Resistance. I should talk about that some more. It's particularly something that's of interest to Black people. She's a Black woman, but seriously, here in North America and especially in the United States, um, overwork and exhaustion are a badge of honor, and it's ridiculous. People are running themselves into the ground, and then they wonder why they dropped dead at the age of 47. Like, I was so sad to hear about Dave Hollis. I really like him. But anyway, tonight I'm going to talk about um, this lady, Brene Brown. It's interesting because if you've followed me at all, then you know that I like to run and listen to audiobooks. And then very often I take things that I learned from these audiobooks and I share them with you because education is something that's near and dear to my heart. And when there's people who have worthwhile things to say, I think it's a good idea to share them. So, um, I was running. So this past couple of weeks when I've been running, I've been listening to Brene Brown. Now I have all sorts of her audiobooks, but this is interesting. This is actually an audible original, as they call it. So something you can only get as an audiobook. It doesn't exist as an actual book. And it's basically came out in 2012. I think it was part of her book tour for this book, Daring Greatly, which is what really made her famous. I mean, she had a TED talk that people really, went viral and so on, and that was the beginning of her fame. But this this book, Daring Greatly, and she's written other books as well, but this one is really what cemented her as a thought leader. And it's interesting because this book came out in 2012, and that Audible original is from 2012, and I'm like running along and I'm listening to her talk about polarization and about isolation and all the things that we need to do to be more connected with each other and care for each other and community and so on. And I'm listening to her and I'm going like, oh, honey, you have no idea what's coming. This was in 2012. This was even pre-Trump, let alone the pandemic. So yeah, there's been a lot of interesting stuff. But anyway, there's a lot of good stuff in this book, and there's a lot of good stuff in her Audible as well. And specifically, what I wanted to talk about tonight was the concept of numbing, because it's something that we all do, and it really struck me as she was talking about it. And the reason I'm looking from side to side is because I've got um, three different devices looking at me. So I want to make sure that I'm talking to all the people in the different places. because you are all dear to me. And I would love it if you would say hello and tell me what you think of the concept of numbing. So, in this book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown talks about what she calls the armory, the different kind of shields that we use. And I've talked about this before, but I undoubtedly will talk about it again because there's always stuff going along. And there's always stuff to talk about from these books. Like there's always new things. Old things are new things, like humans are humans. And so she talks about various ways that we shield ourselves from vulnerability. You know, people will just say, well, I don't do vulnerability. She herself is a fifth generation white Texan. So, yeah, she had to learn the hard way how to be vulnerable. That's not something that she learned at home. And just as an aside, uh, as she's, like I mentioned, she is a white Texan, and a lot of her audience is white people. And I've seen on social media people talking about, especially Black women, talking about. Somebody said Brene Brown gives me a headache. They don't necessarily feel spoken to by her concepts, and that's fair. It's not for everybody, but I just wanted to say that in this audible that I was listening to, she does talk about how Black and people of color um, have a very different concept of the dominant culture. And she talks about, you know, how fish and, you know, don't see the water, that it's harder for white people to really see what's going on. And, you know, and just the self-awareness and the awareness of the reigning paradigm. She does actually talk about how it's the things that she's talking about are different for Black people and people of color. So I don't think a lot of people have heard her say that. I don't know how often she said it. Like I said, this was in 2012. Maybe she needs to say it again because I did see some criticism of her on social media that had to do with that. But as an aside, talking about numbing, and that is something that everybody does. You don't have to have white skin to engage in numbing because the thing is that it can be really exhausting to carry this shield of numbing. She calls it the what she calls it the 200-pound shield. That, you know, we carry it around thinking that it's going to protect us, but all it does is really exhaust us. And when she talks about numbing, she's talking not just about addiction, although you could say that addiction is an extreme form of numbing. You know, you can have the person who drinks a glass of wine to take the edge off before dinner. But if she does it every night, that can become problematic. And then there's a person who drinks a lot more and, you know, and knocks themselves out because they really don't want to feel their pain. And then we say that there's a person with an addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or shopping or sex or work. Workaholism is a serious problem, again, especially in the United States, but here in Canada as well. People just drown themselves in work. In fact, I was listening to her. She was talking about a situation that she had, that she'd stopped smoking and drinking, and she'd also given up um, sugar and flour. So can you imagine? That's got to be so hard. So anyway, she goes to her therapist, and she tells her therapist, that's how hard it is. And the therapist is like, so have you looked at work lately? And it turns out she's working 60, 70 hours a week all of a sudden because she's no longer smoking or drinking or eating sugar or flour. So she's working instead. Like she said, it just channeled itself somewhere else. And then what I thought was really amazing is she goes to the therapist and she says, I need a shell. She said, I feel like a turtle without a shell in the briar patch. And, and I need a new shell, and I don't have, all of these different forms of numbing that she had forsworn, whether it's sugar. Sugar is a big one for me, by the way. I find it really problematic, especially if I'm anxious and not getting enough sleep, then I'm going to dive headfirst into the sugar, and it's a problem. Just as an aside, just to be vulnerable here with you. And So her therapist says, well, have you considered leaving the briar patch? Like, you don't have to live in the briar patch. So what? He says, you're being poked because you're living in the briar patch. And then you could live quite happily without the shell if you just weren't getting poked all the time, which I wish I could have met her therapist, who apparently retired after she was done with Brene. I don't know if there's a correlation there. But one of the things that she talks about in this book, when she's talking about the people who she calls the wholehearted with a capital W, and people who live the sort of life that they allow themselves to be vulnerable and so on. And then she asks them how they deal with numbing. And a really important way to deal with numbing, to stop numbing, to step out of the briar patch and not feel the need to cover yourself with a shell, whether it's smoking, drinking, eating, shopping, working, whatever it is to set boundaries. And I found that so fascinating because it's not the first thing that would come to most people's minds. And yet, in this book, she talks about how she interviewed people who were wholehearted, people who avoided numbing themselves. And she says that one of the things that they do, they feel all of the things. It's not that they don't have the temptation to numb, just like the rest of us. I mean, they might want to sit and click through mindless TV for 2 hours, just like anybody else. I mean, I don't watch TV so much, but Twitter is my drug sometimes. I'll just sit on the couch and flip through Twitter for no reason whatsoever. Like, it doesn't add anything to my life except that it numbs the things that I don't want to think about. So there, I've told you two of mine, sugar and Twitter. But anyway, boundaries. And I just find that so mind-blowing that is a major solution for dealing with numbness, with numbing. And there's other things as well. I mean, there's a whole book. And I've been talking for a while now, so I should probably not carry on much longer. But there's the idea that if you can set boundaries, you will not need to numb. Maybe you won't need to numb so much. I mean, this is not magic we're talking about here. But says people who just figured out what was enough and what was too much and what they could handle. And then at some point they just said no. And I just find that so mind blowing. So I'm going to talk some more about this probably. I'm not done with it, but I've been talking now for almost 15 minutes. So it's enough. I like to keep these short. So I would love to hear from you if you've been watching me on any of these channels. I would love to see any sort of comments from you. I don't know whether StreamYard is preventing me from getting comments from Facebook and LinkedIn, because I know in the past I used to get more comments than I'm getting now. So I'm going to check on that. But you have a great evening. Remember, I love you. And I remember something else I wanted to tell you, and that is that I have started a Facebook group called Vigor and Dignity. I think it's called Vigor and Dignity for All, even. And I'm going to be, I'll be putting these talks in there. I'll be putting in information. And it's just, I want to build a community. And right now it's just on Facebook, but if there's interest, we can build it in other places as well. Why not? But maybe one at a time. So right now it's just on Facebook. So if you are on Facebook, drop me a message, connect with me. Feel free to send me a friend request if we aren't friends. And I want to build a community of people who care about each other, who care about the world, who care about being healthy and vigorous and living with dignity and peace and joy. So we have a tall order, but why not? We can do it. So you have a great evening. Remember, I love you, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye. See how we turn it all off. broadcast.